This episode brought to you by Cafe Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees. Independently owned and operated since 1993, Cafe Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from?
And by the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. As a nonprofit, we rely on support from listeners like you. If you like what you hear, please consider a donation. To learn more and make a gift, visit us at www.gosuperior.org.
Welcome to the Lake Superior Podcast. I'm Walt Lindala.
And I'm Frida Waara. We are made stronger by story, and there's no better source than the continent's largest body of fresh water, Lake Superior.
So join us as we highlight the 5 national parks that ring this greatest of the Great Lakes, meet the people, tour the places, and learn about the projects that make these parks and body of water so remarkable.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
I'm Walt Lindala.
And I'm Frida Waara.
Welcome once again to the Lake Superior Podcast. Today, Frida, this one's all you. You had a chance to kind of get a little insight into what we're going to be talking about here, but it has to do with bats, the study and research of bats, and with a leading expert on it. Tell me a little bit about what we have set up here.
So I have to tell you that this first came to me as a topic that we should really digest here with the Lake Superior Podcast when I was at the Fresh Coast Film Festival, and we had one of the documentaries that was featured was Invisible Mammals. I got to tell you, I love Walt to be outdoors. I really do. But bats to me aren't, they're not my favorite. I love them because I think they take care of some mosquitoes out there, but boy, oh boy. And I watched the documentary and I said, I need to meet this woman. So we're all going to get to meet her today. That's Dr. Winifred Frick.
That's right. She is Bat Conservation International Chief Scientist, also adjunct professor of ecology and evolutionary biology at University of California, Santa Cruz. Dr. Frick, welcome to the podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for this, by the way. And we just want to get right into this, that you are someone that is chief scientist with Bat Conservation International. You've researched and studied bats. How long have you been doing that, and what got you down that path?
Oh, yes. Great question. So I'm coming up on my 10-year anniversary of working for Bat Conservation International, which is absolutely my dream job. Love it. And before that, I was a research professor at UC Santa Cruz, and I've actually spent my whole career studying bats and thinking about ways that we can use science to protect them. So I hate to give away my age here, but yeah, I've been studying bats for 25 years now. And I got my start. I was getting ready to go back into graduate school, didn't know quite what I wanted to do, but I volunteered to work with somebody who was a consultant working on bats. He's now my husband. I like to say we fell in love, and I fell in love with bats at the same time.
There you go. I like that.
Yeah, it's a great story. Now, a lot of people may think that bats can be, as Frida kind of alluded to at the beginning, they can be kind of creepy, and they're a little bit like, they can be spooky, they can be scary. But help us get over that and tell us a little bit more about bats and how many we have in species in North America. Just give us some background about the bat.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, bats are the only mammals that can fly. I think one of the reasons why people can sometimes think of them as being spooky is like, yes, we do. They're associated with Halloween because they fly at night. But they're also mysterious, and sometimes we fear things that we don't really understand. But people who have the opportunity that, like I do, to actually get to hold a bat in your hand and see it up close, they're just adorable. And usually that fear just melts right away when you get a chance to really see them up close. Now, there's lots of different kinds of bats, so full disclosure, not every single species out there is adorable. They're worldwide. We just celebrated the discovery of the 1,500 bat species. So there's 1,500 different species that we currently know about around the world. Most of that bat diversity is focused in tropical latitudes. Here in North America, there's about 47 different bat species that call the U.S. and Canada home.
Wow.
How long do they live?
Well, this is one of the cool things about bats. Bats have all these fun bat facts. And bats are really small-bodied, but they live for a really long time. I think the record is a bat that lives in Siberia and is known to be, I think, 42 or 43 years old. That's based off of somebody putting a band on the forearm and then capturing that bat 42 or 43 years later. And so usually in mammals, we think of mammals that have small body sizes live really short lives. Think like rodents. Bats are not rodents, by the way. They're in their own order. And things that are really large-bodied, like elephants, live a really long time. And if you actually graph that out, you can make a graph that's got body size of the mammal on the x-axis and then lifespan on the y-axis. And most mammals sort of follow a little line where the larger the body size, the longer the lifespan. But you have this outlier where there's this one dot all by itself, and that is a mammal that's got a small body size and a really long lifespan, and that's the bats.
Wow. I like that. I like, 30 years was, I think when I was watching the documentary, 30 years was an average for our North American species.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
How about, how many times does a female have, and what is a baby bat called? Is it a pup?
It is a pup.
Okay.
Yeah. Mom bats give birth to one pup per year. So again, remember that bats fly. And bats are mammals like we are. And so being pregnant when you're flying has got to be really tricky. I had the most appreciation for bats ever when I was pregnant with my son. So you can really only manage to have one pup per year. And those pups in North America are born, June, July, when it's summertime and there's lots of insects out flying around and lots to eat. And the females can give birth, nurse, and then the pups learn to fly and are ready to sort of fly off and be on their own before winter comes.
This is really interesting. Now, I feel like we're at a point in our learning in our society that we are starting to understand bats better than maybe we did 20, 30, 40 years ago. But one of those things that's driving that is the fact that we have an understanding that they have a role in our ecosystem. Can you break that down a little bit? Why are bats important to our ecosystem?
Yes, absolutely. Bats are super important. I always like to lead this type of answer with emphasizing that all wildlife is important. Nature is important, and you're right that we're doing. There's an increased appreciation and understanding of the importance of nature and wildlife. And part of that is being able to document and really quantify the kinds of services that wildlife and nature provides to us as people. And bats are a great example of that. So in North America, all of our bat species are insectivorous, so they eat lots and lots of insects every night. And some of those insects are crop pests. So there's been research that's been done in the Midwest where they built these big nets over cornfields and showed that, if you don't let bats forage over your cornfields, that you have more damage to your corn crop from crop pests. And there's also been estimates where a colleague of mine, Justin Boyles, did an analysis where he looked at the economic value provided by bats to different crops in the U.S. and then estimated that bats provide billions of dollars to the U.S. agricultural economy in terms of the number of crop pests that they eat. And if they're not eating those crop pests, then farmers have to put on more pesticides, which not only costs them money, but also does other kinds of damage to our environment. And those ecosystem services, there's been lots of studies replicated over globally. So in Australia, looking at cotton, and in Spain, looking at rice, and Thailand, looking at rice, bats luckily have a real fondness for eating different kinds of crop pests. So that's been one of the ways that we've documented the value that bats provide. And then in tropical areas, bats are also really important pollinators of different plants, including agaves, which we always like to say, if you like your margarita, toast a bat. Because bats are the natural pollinators of agaves, which tequila is made from. And then they're also important seed dispersers in tropical rainforests. So they like fig fruits and other kinds of tropical fruits, and they will grab the fruit and fly long distances, and they're messy eaters, so they drop the fruit, and then the seeds can sprout and help regenerate in deforested areas.
Fascinating. What is the average range for a bat, and do they stick in one area? I mean, are they kind of like homing pigeons?
Yeah, great question. So understanding bats' migratory behaviors is something that we're still currently learning about. Because bats are so small-bodied, it's been really hard to put different kinds of transmitters on them to be able to follow them long ways. Some of the kinds of devices we can put on birds that can show the really cool long-distance migrations that birds do have little solar panels on them so that they can charge up during the day. But bats fly at night, and then during the day, they're usually in dark places, so you can't really put a solar panel on a transmitter for a bat. So we know a lot less about bat movements than we do about bird movements. But we do know that bats do move around seasonally, and some bats do long-distance migrations during between winter and summer, and some bats do shorter distance migration. So most bats will move to a different kind of habitat in the summer than in the winter. So like up in the Lake Superior region, because it's so cold, in the winter, bats will move underground into caves and mines, so that even though bats are mammals like we are, they actually have a special ability to turn their metabolisms off. I like to say that they literally chill out in the winter and they go cold to save energy. And so they'll tuck into the abandoned mines up in the UP, and we'll wait until all that cold weather has passed, because there's nothing to eat during the really cold winter because there's no insects flying. And they wait until May or June when the snow thaws and trees are leafing out and the insects come back, and then there's lots for them to eat. So in the summertime, they don't necessarily want to be in those caves and mines that are cold. They want to be in trees, or sometimes in people's barns, or under bridges, in places where females can group up and cuddle together because they like to stay warm during the summer and have their pups.
This is interesting that you're bringing up a lot of this information. And we're talking, by the way, with Dr. Winifred Frick, who is Bat Conservation International Chief Scientist, also an adjunct professor of ecology and evolutionary biology at University of California, Santa Cruz. Dr. Frick, the funny part, or the interesting part to me is I've grown up in an area that you've studied, which is the Keweenaw Peninsula, which is, juts out into the Lake Superior area. I grew up with bats. I grew up with bats being part of sort of on the lake shore, and it was just, they were always around, but they would every now and then go tuck up into the eaves of the house in the wintertime or something like that. Exactly what you're talking about. But now I've noticed as I'm outside more, there may not be as many bats, especially here in the Lake Superior region. Are there certain things, and if so, what, that is affecting the health of the bats that we have around Lake Superior?
Yeah, great question. So unfortunately, in the Lake Superior region, the disease white nose syndrome, this is a disease that is caused by a fungal pathogen. The fungus is called Pseudogymnoascus destructans, and because that's such a mouthful, we just abbreviate it to PD. It first emerged and started killing bats in upstate New York in the winter of 2006-2007, so coming up on 20 years now. The fungus is spread through eastern North America and got into the UP area, the Lake Superior area, probably about a decade or so ago now. And it has killed millions of bats in its wake. So the bats that are most vulnerable to this disease are the little brown bat, which used to be one of the most common species and would be, probably the species that you remember seeing as a kid, and likes to tuck up into people's attics and barns and things. But also the northern long-eared bat, which was naturally a little more rare, but was common throughout the Lake Superior region. We've seen a 99% decline in the population of that species. So and it is now federally protected as an endangered species because there's so few left. And also the tricolored bats, which also occur up in that region. So, those species have been really hard hit by white nose syndrome. There still are some populations hanging on, living in some of the abandoned mines in that region. Those mines are really important habitats for the bats. And I want to give a shout out to the Michigan DNR, John Depew, who lives in Houghton, has done a really amazing job of being a steward and working on facilitating research, but also managing to protect those bat colonies that are still using those abandoned mines. The other threat that exists is the development of wind energy in the Great Lakes region. So the bats that are more vulnerable to being killed by wind turbines are species like the hoary bat or the eastern red bat. These are our long-distance migratory bats, the silver-haired bats, and they are most at risk during the fall season when they're moving across the landscape. And there's some concern about the impact of wind energy in that region on our migratory bats, and then the bats that hibernate underground are at risk from white nose syndrome. So it's a concerning time to be a bat.
Well, it's interesting because I remember white nose syndrome sort of appearing in the news and it being talked about with DNR folks and everything like that. Just to clarify, this is that then it manifests itself in the bat with a white nose, that this is that infection. Is it transmitted when they're within close contact like that, if I remember? I mean, what is that? Just so we have that clear for white nose syndrome, why it's called that and how it's transmitted.
Yeah, exactly. Great question. So it's caused by a fungus, and the fungus can grow. The fungus grows on the skin tissues of the bat, so on the wings and the tail membrane, as well as the ears and the muzzle. When it was first discovered in New York, the bats had this characteristic kind of white fuzz on their noses, and that had never been seen before. And in fact, actually, there was histories of taking photographs of the bats as a way of counting them as part of the monitoring efforts that were going on. And you can go back to this historic records of the photographs, and you never see bats with white noses until the winter of 2006. And that was right before the population started crashing, and dead bats were on the cave of the floor. Now, bats can have white nose syndrome. They can have the fungus on their wings, and when the fungus sort of invades into their skin tissue, you can think of it a little bit like having a really bad case of athlete's foot, right? It's a fungus, and it's kind of feeding on the skin tissues. But the fungus can also persist in the caves and mines, on the surface. So when bats return to those caves and mines to start their hibernation in the late fall, early winter, they come into contact with it, and then it starts to grow on them, and then the fungus will kind of eat into their skin and then sort of shed more into the environment. And so bats can pick it up either by coming in contact with each other and or coming in contact with the surfaces where they roost, where the fungus is on the roosting substrates.
So, Dr. Frick, is there a treatment for this fungus?
There's not a single treatment. Researchers have been working for close to 2 decades now to come up with ways of trying to help the bats that are exposed to this fungus. And there's a number of promising lines of inquiry. So one is there is a researcher with the USGS at the National Wildlife Health Center that in Madison. And she's been working on a vaccine, actually, that is showing some signs of promise. There's also a number of different strategies around trying to either kind of neutralize or kill the fungus in the caves and mines where it persists so that we can kind of clean those environments. That has to be done very carefully so that we're not putting toxic substances or killing a lot of things other than the fungus in some of those environments. That's especially important in natural caves where there's, rich natural biota in those caves. You don't want to just be, inadvertently wreaking other kinds of havoc and trying to kill this one fungus. And then there's been some work done in Pennsylvania to try to, and actually some of this work is being piloted as well up in the UP to see if changing the microclimate conditions of the mines could help create conditions that are best for the bats for hibernating and to allow them to survive. And then the project that we were testing up in the UP was helping improve foraging conditions so that bats can get really fat before hibernation as a way of sort of being able to withstand the and survive the infection even if they do get infected.
Okay.
What we like to call our fat bat project.
Yeah,
I want to hear more about that. Yeah.
And real quick here, as we talk about this, then you have been to the Great Lakes region. You've been in the Keweenaw Peninsula, the Lake Superior area, to study the bats that are based here. You're touching on it here a little bit, some ideas and things to help with the survival rate. Now, this fat bat project in particular, I mean, let's talk about that a little bit. I mean, you're basically saying if they kind of bulk up a little bit, they might be a little stronger. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, so this idea came from an observation. So the way that white nose kills the bats is that it causes them to burn up their energy reserves during the long winter, right? So normally what happens is bats come into hibernation at the beginning of winter, and they try to put on as much fat as possible to be able to make it through the really long winter without ever having to eat. And what happens with white nose is that the fungus, they get exposed to the fungus, and that infection causes them to arouse too frequently from that torpor state that is really energy saving, and then they burn up their fat reserves trying to fight off the fungus, and then they starve to death before spring. And we had seen in some areas where white nose had caused some declines that bats that were still surviving tended to be much fatter going into hibernation. So one of the things I love about being at Bat Conservation International is that our work is really focused on how do we take science that's being done and think about ways of turning that into a conservation action that can help bats. So we had this little bit of this out-of-the-box idea of, well, could we help bats get as fat as possible in the fall, and would that then help them survive? And so that was the work we piloted up in the UP. It's actually funded by the Electric Power Research Institute, which has been a really great partner and supporter of this work. And to test this idea, we put up UV lights near Delaware Mine and a couple other abandoned mines up near Houghton, and then measured if the UV lights attracted different kinds of insects that the bats like to eat, and then we measured how much foraging the bats did at those lights. And what we found was that both in the fall, kind of going into hibernation, as well as in the spring when they're kind of coming out and are really hungry and sort of the females come out of hibernation and they've got to try to heal any wing lesions that they might have had, as well as, recover their body fat in time to be able to have their babies. And the bats loved foraging at these lights. We increased the foraging rates at the lights quite a bit. And so our hope is that it's a simple action that we can take that can basically give the bats the best chance of surviving, hopefully until we can either figure out how to get the fungus out of those caves or the vaccine starts to work. And maybe there's also ways that we can think about restoring areas to provide the more insects to help increase the foraging opportunities for the bats.
Now, when we're talking about all of this, we're hearing a lot of information now with this, the bats, and maybe we thought bats were just one particular thing, but there's so much here that to unpack with this conversation. I guess there's a sort of a bottom line question is there something that we can do, at least in our area or even individually, that can help improve our bat populations? Because I'm hearing a lot of imbalance, a lot of predators of bugs and things like that. The bat not being there is going to throw the more bugs out there. It's going to cause these problems possibly with crops. It's going to cause problems possibly with people coming to an area as tourists and visitors because there's a lot more bugs. What can we do to help improve the bat populations, even just little things?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one thing that at Bat Conservation International that we're doing is we have a bat gardens program where we're encouraging people to plant native plants that help increase the native moths and beetle diversity. So bats have really good, high quality moths and beetles to feast on, and also doing things like, making sure that you're advocating for nature protection in your area and supporting groups that are working on restoring riparian areas and forest areas so that there's really good natural habitats for your bats. And then maybe it sounds a little self-serving, but also supporting organizations like Bat Conservation International that are funding research in conservation actions to benefit bats is another effective way to help bats.
Dr. Frick, has climate change affected things for bats? Because I'm looking at our bugs. And for example, we really deal a lot in our area with Lyme's disease. So the ticks are coming. We didn't have that problem 10 years ago, it seems. We were a little bit immune because we had a shorter summer season. It was colder, faster. Are those things affecting the insects that are the healthiest for a bat to eat?
Very likely. So there's a lot of concern about what some people are calling the insect apocalypse, which is a noticed decline in our global insect populations. And insects are the food base for not just most of our bats, but also a lot of our birds too. And so if we lose that biomass of native insects, that is going to have impacts on our bats and our birds. How much of the drivers of that global decline in insects is due to climate change versus other stressors, I'm not sure, but I think that people think that it's kind of a multifaceted, a multi-stressor kind of situation. In general, climate change does affect bats in terms of extreme temperatures can cause die-offs of bats. Now, this has been most dramatically seen in places like Australia, where you have the large flying foxes that roost out in trees, and they're very susceptible to heat stress. And we've seen, massive numbers die in some of the big heat events in Australia. But those kind of heat events can also cause colonies that are maybe roosting in areas that maybe a bat's in a more exposed kind of eave of a house or something that and if there's a really, really hot, extreme hot spell, that can cause them to become to suffer from heat stress. And also the shifts in phenology is another area that we're concerned about, where, the timing of when bats are coming out of hibernation, they need to be able to forage effectively in that spring period. And if we're seeing really irregular weather or extreme weather events during those vulnerable periods, that could really disrupt their survival and or like the mismatch between when the food's available and when they're kind of coming out of hibernation. We saw in Texas, and during the big freeze that people remember, I think it was 2021, a lot of the Mexican free-tailed bats that were roosting under the bridges died in that big freeze event because they were vulnerable to that massive freeze.
Yeah, there's a lot there in terms of all these factors that come into play. And I guess the question I have also now is, and we're talking once again with Dr. Winifred Frick, Chief Scientist, Bat Conservation International, also Adjunct Professor, Ecology and Evolutionary Biology, University of California, Santa Cruz. Where can our listeners hear more about what you do and your work and get some more information, as I'm sure this has piqued a lot of curiosity and interest?
Absolutely. Yeah. So please visit batcon.org. That's BATCON, stands for batconservation.org. That's the organization I work for's website, Bat Conservation International. And also check out like Michigan DNR's wildlife page. I don't know the URL, but I know that both Michigan and Wisconsin have really great state Department of Natural Resources that probably also have information about local bats.
Very good conversation with you here today. This has been a lot. There's even a lot more that we could keep going with, but it's just been fascinating to hear from you, Dr. Frick, about, well, I guess just kind of the bat. And like Frida and I, we started off here and it was like, well, it's the bats and we see the bats, but there's so much more to learn. And Frida, I mean, I'm glad you were able to kind of line this up today for us a little bit.
I don't know if I would ever stand behind Dr. Frick with my rubber gloves and everything and kind of hold one of those yet, but I'm getting a lot closer, and certainly understanding the puzzle that is in our outdoor world and how every piece matters to that puzzle.
Thank you for your time today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much. This has been fun.
Dr. Winifred Frick, Bat Conservation International's Chief Scientist, also an Adjunct Professor of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at University of California, Santa Cruz. And Frida, it's really interesting because I have noticed this. Sitting on the Lake Superior shoreline, sitting on the shoreline of Portage Lake in Chassel, all of that, places where I grew up, the Keweenaw Peninsula. There are not as many bats as there used to be. There's also not as many insects. You notice at night you don't see as many fireflies or whatever they officially have the science name for. And this is really good food for thought here that Dr. Frick gave us.
Yes, absolutely. And understanding that they are truly an important part of not only our ecosystem, but our economic system. Mm-hmm. When you look at agriculture out there, mm-hmm. that they are responsible for as much as 30% of what that crop will yield. Mm-hmm. And the corn example that she had, it's really good to know every little piece matters.
Are you feeling a little bit better about bats now?
I don't know.
Well, keep that in mind the next time you see some bats flying around. They are doing some good for us, not only around the Great Lakes region, but around the world. And we do want to thank Dr. Winifred Frick for joining us, and just a great conversation. And we want to remind you that if there's something that you'd like to hear on the podcast, you can reach us through the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation website. Let us know. We're always looking for topics because stories like this, obviously in our conversation, rooted around the big blue, but they have a reach around the world. And let us know what you'd like to hear. But that's going to do it for us this time around on the Lake Superior podcast. I'm Walt Lindala.
And I'm Frida Waara. Thanks for listening. The National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation, NPLSF, is the only official nonprofit 501c3 fundraising partner of the National Park Service for all 5 U.S. national park sites on Lake Superior.
To learn more about NPLSF projects and programs, you can visit the website at nplsf.org or friend them on Facebook.
I'm Frida Waara.
And I'm Walt Lindala. Thanks for listening to the Lake Superior Podcast.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
This episode brought to you by Cafe Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees. Independently owned and operated since 1993, Cafe Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from?
And by the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. As a nonprofit, we rely on support from listeners like you. If you like what you hear, please consider a donation. To learn more and make a gift, visit us at www.gosuperior.org.